Ladies and gentlemen, seekers of truth, wanderers of the inner and outer cosmos, there are moments in life that feel like more than coincidence, like whispers from a deeper intelligence guiding us along invisible threads of fate. We are not merely solitary beings drifting through a meaningless void. No, we are participants in a greater unfolding, threads in the tapestry of an archetypal story larger than ourselves. And when it comes to love, true soul, deep connection, the universe often speaks in symbols, synchronicities, and quiet knowing. It doesn't shout, it beckons. If the universe wants you to be with someone, it will send you signs. But these signs are not loud, they are subtle, personal, and profound. One must be attuned not merely to the noise of the world, but to the silence within. Let us now explore the signs, those sacred indicators, that you are being drawn into a union written beyond the veil of time. When two souls are destined to meet, the fabric of reality begins to bend in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. What may seem like chance at first, a passing encounter, an overheard name, a sudden urge to be somewhere you've never planned, slowly reveals itself to be part of a deeper orchestration. These are not coincidences in the trivial sense. They are moments of synchronicity where the outer world reflects something unfolding in your inner world. You might brush them off initially. Perhaps you think it's just random, or I'm reading too much into it, but they persist. They multiply. The same song that plays when you think of them starts echoing from unlikely places. Their name appears in conversations with strangers. You begin to notice numbers repeating, perhaps the time you first met, or the date that seems to follow you everywhere. What you once dismissed now starts to feel personal, directed, intentional, as though life itself is conspiring quietly, gently, to awaken your attention to something just beyond reason. The curious nature of synchronicity is that it emerges only when the soul is ready to perceive it. Before that readiness, we are blind to the sacred language of the world. But when a soul destined for another is drawing near, we become attuned. The veil thins. The psyche, stirred from within, starts to notice what the rational mind cannot explain. A series of events unfolds with such precision that the probability defies logic. You think of someone, and they message you. You speak about them, and they appear. You try to move on, yet signs tether you to an unseen thread that keeps pulling you back, not in obsession, but in quiet recognition. That thread does not bind, it signals. The repetition is not random. The alignment is not accidental. It is the language of the unconscious made manifest in the fabric of life itself. This connection to signs is not about superstition or magical thinking. It is about meaning. The psyche seeks meaning, and when two souls are on a collision course, the symbolic field comes alive. The same way dreams communicate in metaphor, the world too becomes dreamlike. The boundaries between inner and outer begin to blur. A moment with someone feels larger than it should. You experience déjà vu not as a fleeting glitch, but as a recognition of something ancient. This is the field in which synchronicity blooms, not in the rational timeline of events, but in the timeless rhythm of the soul's unfolding journey. In that rhythm, people appear not merely as bodies, but as archetypes, messengers, mirrors, keys, and catalysts. When the one meant for you approaches, they carry not only their own story, but the echo of your own longing, the unanswered question in your heart that you forgot you were asking. You may find that the timing of your meeting is impossibly precise, not too soon, not too late, but exactly when your soul is prepared to see them for what they are. Before that, the world may have kept you apart, not out of cruelty, but out of care. The universe is less concerned with comfort than it is with readiness, and so, when the signs start to arrive, one after another, sometimes subtle, sometimes overwhelming, it is not a signal to chase, to force, to demand clarity. It is an invitation to notice, to become conscious, to listen beneath the noise of doubt. Synchronicity is a dialogue between the self and the world, and love destined by the universe does not announce itself with thunder. It hums like a quiet song only your soul remembers, growing louder with each step you take in alignment with your deeper path. These signs are a compass, but not a map, a rhythm, but not a script. You do not follow them blindly. You allow them to tune your awareness to the possibilities waiting just beyond what you can yet explain. When someone is meant to be in your life, they do not arrive as a stranger alone. They arrive as a mirror, reflecting back parts of you you didn't know were there, or perhaps parts you've long forgotten or tried to hide. This reflection is not always comforting, because it reaches far beneath the surface of who you pretend to be, who you've convinced yourself you are in the eyes of the world. Their presence can stir something deep within you, something ancient and raw, something not shaped by your persona, but by the shadow you carry silently. When the universe intends for you to meet someone, that person doesn't flatter your ego. Instead, they call forth your essence. They see through the masks, the defenses, the stories you've rehearsed about your past and your future. And it's not because they're trying to dismantle you. It's because they recognize you on a level that transcends logic. And that recognition pulls your soul out from hiding. This kind of person will often challenge you without intending to. In fact, their very being might trigger something within old wounds, forgotten desires, buried fears. The way they speak or the way they look at you might awaken a feeling you cannot trace, but that nonetheless vibrates with a truth you cannot deny. The soul remembers before the mind understands, and what it remembers is not always easy. You may feel exposed, vulnerable, as if you are being seen for the first time, not with judgment, but with an uncanny intimacy that leaves no room for pretense. And in that moment, you begin to understand that love, in its truest form, is not merely about comfort or compatibility. It is about revelation. It is about being seen in your wholeness and still being invited forward, not because you are perfect, but because you are becoming. There is often an unspoken knowing when you are with this person, like your unconscious recognizes theirs. You find yourself understanding things you were never told. Their pain feels familiar. Their joy resonates like your own. There's a kind of psychic communication. Words are helpful, yes, but not necessary. Their silence speaks as much as their speech. You sense when they're near without seeing them. You feel their absence not just as loneliness, but as a deep psychic absence, as if part of you has gone quiet until their energy returns. It is not obsession, it is connection on a plane that precedes thought. And this depth does not arise from fantasy, but from the awakening of archetypal forces within you, forces that exist outside of your individual story, forces that belong to the collective myth of lovers who recognize one another across lifetimes. What is most striking about such a person is not how they make you feel in the easy moments, but how they hold you in the difficult ones, not because they always know what to say, but because they do not turn away when your edges appear. They hold space for your contradictions, for your unfinished parts. They don't demand your healing, they accompany it. And through this presence you begin to see yourself differently, not as broken, but as unfolding, not as unworthy, but as becoming whole. This is the mirror effect, not just seeing who you are, but seeing who you are called to be, reflected in the eyes of someone who does not ask you to become smaller to be loved. Instead, they ask nothing of you but authenticity, because your authenticity is what stirs theirs, and in that shared stirring, something ancient awakens. And yet, this mirroring is not always symmetrical. At times, the connection feels unbalanced, confusing, as though you're being asked to navigate an emotional terrain that shifts beneath your feet. But this too is part of the mirror, for what it reflects is not only beauty, but the distortions you've lived by, the fears you've clung to, the love you've withheld from yourself. You come to see that the relationship is not just about being with someone, it is about being with yourself through them. They are the doorway, not the destination, and stepping through that doorway demands the courage to meet your own reflection not with shame, but with curiosity. There are moments when you meet someone and the rules of time no longer seem to apply. Minutes stretch into something eternal, hours dissolve into seconds, and suddenly you realize that you're not keeping track of time at all because time itself has changed texture around them. It's not just that you enjoy their company, it's that being with them feels like stepping into another realm entirely, one where clocks are silent and presence becomes everything. The experience is not loud or overwhelming, but deeply serene, as if the soul recognizes a rhythm it once knew before the mind learned to measure moments in minutes and days. You find yourself suspended, not in fantasy, but in a depth of connection that pulls you inward even as it draws you toward them. There is no rush, no urgency, and yet everything feels immediate, as though something important is happening, something that cannot be explained by logic alone. This sense of timelessness often arrives with a strange familiarity, the quiet recognition that this person, though seemingly new to your life, has somehow always been near. You might not be able to point to a memory, yet there is a feeling that you have met before, in another place, another lifetime, or perhaps in the vast inner world of dreams. Their presence doesn't feel foreign. It feels like returning home to a part of yourself you didn't realize had been missing. Conversations with them feel less like discovery and more like remembrance, like retrieving a language you forgot you knew. You don't need to over-explain or defend yourself, because they meet you in the space beneath the words, where understanding happens before expression. It is as if the deeper layers of your psyche already know each other, and the surface layers, your personalities, your habits, your stories, are only now catching up. This experience is not confined to romance. It is archetypal. It emerges from the part of the human soul that longs for unity, not with another person merely, but with a part of existence that transcends separation. When you are with this person, you feel whole not because they complete you, but because their presence dissolves the illusion that you were ever incomplete. They do not fix your wounds, instead, they make space for them to breathe. And in that spaciousness, time slows down. Healing is no longer a race. Becoming is no longer a project. You are simply allowed to be, and in that being, everything starts to shift, quietly and permanently. Time around them is not the time of schedules and deadlines. It is soul time. It is the kind of time that cannot be measured but can only be felt. It is the time of myth, of dream, of story, the time that belongs to the unconscious, where symbols live and meanings unfold gradually. You may find yourself losing hours in conversation without noticing. You may share a single glance and feel that an entire chapter has been written in silence. This doesn't mean the relationship is perfect or without difficulty, but it means that beneath all surface disruptions, there is an unspoken current moving between you both, one that defies planning and cannot be replicated. You don't try to control it, because some part of you already knows it cannot be controlled. It is not about what you do together, but who you are when you're in their presence, how you come alive, how you soften, how you stop reaching and simply allow yourself to arrive. The illusion of time begins to fade, not because you're ignoring reality, but because something in the presence of this person draws you closer to the eternal. It is the eternal that lives beneath every moment, but is so often drowned out by noise, by fear, by routine. With them, that noise quiets, the routine loses its grip. You remember what it feels like to simply exist, not as a task, not as a performance, but as a soul meeting another soul in the unguarded space where time ceases to matter, because you are no longer measuring life by how long it lasts, but by how deeply it is lived and how fully it is felt in. Stillness that forms between one heartbeat and the next. There comes a moment, quiet and inward, when amidst the chaos of thoughts, doubts, and the noise of everyday life, something within you simply knows. This knowing doesn't shout. It does not compete with the loud voices of fear or logic or the countless questions that your mind tries to ask and answer. It is a still, grounded presence, an inner certainty that sits beneath the surface, like the calm floor of the ocean beneath a storm. When the universe sends someone meant for you, this knowing often arrives before you have any external evidence. It is not a conclusion you reach, it is a recognition that arises. You don't explain it, not even to yourself, and yet it feels more real than anything you could reason through. It's not in the grand moments that this knowing shows itself, but in the ordinary ones, in the way they look at you when you're not speaking, in the way your body relaxes when they walk into the room, in the way your soul says yes before your lips ever form the word. This inner knowing is not about certainty in the future. It doesn't come with promises or guarantees. It is not blind optimism or fantasy dressed up as intuition. It is more ancient than that, more rooted. It's the feeling of resonance, the sense that something deep within you has found an echo, and that echo doesn't need proof to be real. You might still doubt, your mind might still spiral with questions. What if this isn't right? What if I'm projecting? What if it doesn't last? But underneath all that, the knowing remains untouched. It's like a light in the depths, unwavering even when the surface is covered in clouds. And though you may try to dismiss it, distract yourself, convince yourself otherwise, the knowing never argues. It just stays, quiet and patient, waiting for you to remember it again. This is the kind of intuition that doesn't come from impulse or desire. It arises from alignment, when your soul has reached a certain stage in its unfolding, when you have met yourself honestly enough times, when you have endured enough of your own shadow to see clearly. This kind of recognition becomes possible. You see them and you feel something shift, not as if they bring something you lack, but as if they remind you of what was already there. You begin to see your future not as a plan, but as a potential, a space of unfolding that feels more alive when they are beside you. And even if fear arises, and it will, the knowing stays. Even if you try to retreat, and you might, the knowing does not retreat with you. It stays in your chest, a quiet fire that won't be extinguished by doubt. This is not about idealizing the other person. You see them clearly with their flaws, their contradictions, their humanity, and still the knowing remains. It does not depend on perfection. It does not require that everything be smooth. It is not based on fantasy, but on the strange, sacred recognition that somehow your path and theirs are meant to meet here, in this particular moment of time. You may not know what comes next. You may not even know what it means to be with them. But the knowing does not ask for a plan. It asks for presence. It asks for you to stay open, to stay aware, to stay honest with yourself when the mind begins to panic or the past tries to pull you back into its familiar patterns. There's a reason why this kind of certainty feels so rare, because it is not manufactured. It cannot be forced. It is a gift of timing, of growth, of something greater aligning both your inner landscape and the world around you. And when it arrives, it does not seek to overpower your free will, but to harmonize with it. It is a compass, not a command. It leads gently, and even when you lose sight of it, even when fear casts a shadow over it, the knowing does not vanish. It waits beneath the surface for you to be still long enough to feel it again, to listen, not with your ears, but with the part of you that already understands without needing to be told, that already sees without needing to search, that already loves without needing to be convinced sometimes. When the universe intends for someone to walk beside you, life begins to rearrange itself in unexpected, often uncomfortable ways. Paths diverge that once felt certain. Plans fall apart not out of misfortune, but to make space for something else to unfold, something you cannot yet name, but that moves with a quiet intelligence far beyond your conscious grasp. People leave, opportunities dissolve, and what once felt stable begins to tremble under the weight of some invisible shift. This isn't chaos without meaning. It is a sacred undoing, a dismantling not to punish but to prepare. The universe, in its mysterious orchestration, knows that when two souls are meant to meet in truth, the ground must be cleared, old patterns must be broken, illusions must fall away. You may feel lost during this time, disoriented by the absence of what once gave you direction. But this disorientation is the opening through which the destined connection finds its way. There is a peculiar rhythm to the way things begin to align in the midst of this undoing. You notice that the very things you once clung to no longer hold meaning. The people who no longer reflect who you are begin to fade. Circumstances you once fought to maintain begin to slip through your fingers, not because you are failing, but because you are being called to something else. This is the realignment that occurs before the arrival. It does not look like preparation from the outside. It looks like unraveling. But internally, something is shifting, something that was long dormant is awakening, and the old must fall away to make room for the true. This is the universe working not in straight lines, but in spirals, leading you not away from your path, but deeper into it. Even as everything you thought you wanted begins to fall apart in your hands, you begin to encounter moments that seem small but hold great significance. Decisions you almost made but didn't, words you were about to say but swallowed instead, invitations declined that would have changed your course just enough to prevent what was meant to happen. At the time, they may feel like ordinary choices, but in hindsight, they shimmer with the quiet weight of divine timing. You realize that your delays, your pauses, your hesitations were not mistakes but part of the choreography. The missed trains, the rescheduled meetings, the sudden changes of heart were not disruptions. They were alignments. They were the invisible threads that slowly wove your path toward the moment of meeting, the moment when two stories, once moving in separate orbits, begin to draw nearer without even realizing often. This period is accompanied by an inexplicable sense that something is about to change, even if there is no logical reason to believe it. You may feel restless, not in a panicked way, but as though your soul is leaning towards something it cannot yet see. You may find yourself clearing physical space, cleaning, organizing, removing what no longer belongs, not knowing why it suddenly matters to do so. These actions are not trivial. They are the body's way of responding to the soul's preparation. There is a quiet anticipation that lives in your bones, as though some deeper part of you has already received the message and is making ready. And when they finally arrive, not always in dramatic fashion, not always with certainty or clarity, you realize that the upheaval was never random. It was the prelude. This reordering of your life is not punishment for past decisions or a test of your worthiness. It is grace in motion, disguised as disruption. It is the clearing of space in your inner world so that what is meant for you can enter and be received without the clutter of your defenses, your expectations, your fear. The universe does not send what is sacred into places where it cannot be held. It first reshapes you into the version of yourself that can hold what is sacred with reverence, with awareness, with depth. And so the pieces fall, the old scripts burn, the landscape shifts, not to disorient you, but to prepare you for something that cannot arrive until there is room for it to land, until you are no longer grasping, but ready to receive what has been making its way toward you all along. When someone is sent to you by the deeper currents of the universe, synchronicities begin to cluster around your life like constellations pointing toward an unseen center. These are not coincidences in the way we often dismiss them, not simple chance or randomness, but echoes of a deeper alignment that pulses just beneath the surface of what the eyes can see. You start noticing patterns, repeated numbers, names, symbols, dreams that return with uncanny precision, thoughts that are mirrored in conversation or moments of déjà vu, that strike without warning yet leave you momentarily suspended in the awareness that something larger is at play. These synchronicities are not signs to obsess over or to interpret with anxiety. They are gentle affirmations that you are moving with, not against, the rhythm of a greater unfolding. They do not tell you what to do, but they remind you to pay attention, to open the lens wider, to stop measuring life only in logic and begin listening through intuition. You might be thinking about them and then receive a message, hear a song, read a passage that seems to speak directly into the very thought you were having. You might find yourself guided to certain places without knowing why, only to discover later that it was in that exact place that a new layer of the connection was meant to emerge. These patterns do not force you forward, they invite you inward. They call you to pause and attune yourself not just to what is happening, but to what is being orchestrated around you. In these moments, you begin to sense that life is not a random series of events, but a language all its own, and the signs are its grammar, its sacred punctuation marks that help you read between the lines of your own experience. It is not about superstition or wishful thinking. It is about learning to trust that not all knowing comes from analysis. Some comes from resonance, from the soul's capacity to recognize its own path before the mind can name it. This field of synchronicity often intensifies when a significant connection is near or deepening. The soul prepares not through explanations, but through atmosphere. The space around you becomes charged with meaning. Colors feel more vivid. Time feels elastic. The ordinary takes on a shimmer of significance. It's as though life itself is tilting its head toward you, whispering softly, "This is important, stay awake." You do not have to understand the message fully in the moment. What matters is that you notice, that you remain curious, that you resist the urge to dismiss the invisible simply because it does not fit within the frameworks you've been taught. You are being invited into a different way of knowing, a knowing that feels more than it explains, that sees more than it proves, that believes not blindly, but because it remembers. These synchronicities often arrive at points of emotional intensity, times of grief, transformation, or deep longing. This is not accidental. It is because when the ego is softened by change or vulnerability, the soul becomes more perceptive. When you are cracked open, the signals are more easily received. The noise of ordinary life quiets just enough for you to hear what has always been speaking. And in that space, the signs become clearer, not louder, but clearer, because you are finally listening with your whole self. You begin to understand that these moments are not external validations, but internal awakenings. The signs are not telling you what to chase. They are showing you what is already near, what is already resonant with your becoming. In the presence of such alignment, the world begins to feel like it is responding to you, not because it is revolving around your desires, but because you are beginning to walk in rhythm with something that has always been moving beneath the surface of your life. It is not that the signs create the connection. It is that the connection creates the signs. They emerge not as commands, but as confirmation that you are not alone in your movement, that what is meant for you is not far, and that the universe, in its quiet brilliance, leaves traces, not to make you chase, but to help you remember what your soul already knows. When the universe begins to draw two souls toward one another, there is often an unmistakable expansion that takes place within you, not through dramatic transformation or sudden enlightenment, but through subtle and continuous growth that begins to emerge in their presence. It is not that they arrive with the intention to change you, and it is not that you suddenly become someone else, but rather that their energy, their presence, their very way of being calls forward parts of you that had long been hidden, waiting, quietly resting beneath layers of fear, doubt, or neglect. This person does not teach you who you are. They help you remember who you've always been beneath the noise of conditioning and expectation. They do not rescue you, but they create a space where it is finally safe enough for you to rescue yourself, to step more fully into your own essence without apology or pretense, to shed the layers that were once necessary for protection, but have since become too heavy to carry. You begin to notice yourself expanding, not for them, but because of the invitation their presence extends to you. You speak more truthfully, not because they demand it, but because something in you no longer wants to hide. You express yourself more clearly, more creatively, not because you're performing, but because they make it safe to be seen. The growth that begins to unfold is not the kind that comes from striving or fixing, but from blooming, from something dormant finally receiving the sunlight it has always needed. They do not complete you, but they mirror back the parts of you that had been waiting for acknowledgement. And in this mirroring, there is recognition, not of something new, but of something sacred and forgotten. It is as if they stand beside you, not as an answer, but as a reflection of your own capacity to evolve, to move, to become more of yourself with every shared breath, every honest conversation, every quiet moment of simply being together. This kind of growth does not rush. It unfolds organically, like the turning of seasons, each phase bringing a deeper awareness, a deeper clarity. You start to trust yourself more, not just because they trust you, but because being around them reminds you of your own inner knowing. Your boundaries become clearer, not out of defensiveness, but from the realization that you are worthy of protecting your energy. Your desires become more refined, not because they influence them, but because the static begins to fall away, and what you truly want begins to speak louder than what you've been conditioned to want. You begin to take deeper breaths. You laugh more easily. You begin to feel your life not as something to control or fix, but as something to inhabit with greater aliveness, with greater tenderness, with greater presence. They do not push you toward this expansion. They allow it. They become a kind of sacred space, an atmosphere in which your most honest self can stretch without fear of being too much, too sensitive, too intense. And in return, you offer the same to them. This mutual becoming, this reciprocal unfolding, is not about codependence or merging into one identity. It is about resonance. It is about the energy between you acting as fertile soil in which both of your roots can grow deeper, not in spite of each other, but because of the space you offer one another. This is not a love that binds. It is a love that liberates, that insists on authenticity over performance, depth over comfort, honesty over ease. This expansion does not always feel light or joyful. Sometimes it brings grief, the kind of grief that comes from realizing how much of yourself you had kept hidden, how long you had denied your own voice, how many times you had betrayed your intuition for the sake of fitting in or being loved. But even this grief becomes sacred in their presence, because you no longer carry it alone. It is witnessed, it is held. And in that holding, you are transformed not into someone better, but into someone more whole, more present, more awake to the truth that the love meant for you will never ask you to shrink, to silence, to settle, but will always ask you to grow in the direction of your own becoming, even when it is difficult, even when it is unfamiliar, even when it asks you to surrender the safety of who you've been in order to become who you truly are in a world that worships logic and linearity. It is an act of courage to trust the mystical, the symbolic, the intuitive. Love in its truest form is not engineered, it is summoned. It emerges when two souls are ripe for union, when their inner worlds are ready to meet. If you feel the signs, don't rush, don't cling, but don't turn away either. Stay awake, stay honest, and above all, stay connected to the whispering voice within, because when the universe wants you to be with someone, it doesn't force, it invites, and if you listen closely enough, you'll hear the invitation, "Thank you."